Hi, everybody. My name is Jolene Underwood, and I blog at joleneunderwood.com about cultivating a life well lived and a soul well nourished. I am super, super excited to start off the YouTube channel with my first interview with Pastor Marc Schelske, who wrote the book, The Wisdom of Your Heart, Discovering the God-Given Purpose and Power of Your Emotions. Did I say that right?
That's right. You got it.
Oh, good. I got that. So this interview, we don't know each other. We just have connected briefly in the last couple of months through Twitter and Facebook because of his book. I will say that I was scrolling through Twitter and I saw the logo for Wisdom of Your Heart. And I have to be honest, Marc, when I first saw the title, my first thought, the Bible verse that says, the heart is deceitful.
That's right.
And I went, yes. And I said, the wisdom of your heart? Who is this guy? That's my skepticism coming through. And I went, wait a minute, there's something about this. And I don't think I saw the subline just yet. So I clicked in the link, and then I saw the subline and it had to do, or this, whatever you call the subtitle, with emotions. And because I'm so passionate about emotional health as it ties to spiritual growth, it grabbed me right away. And you were doing the launch team. I was super excited to get the book. A little nervous because I didn't know anything about you. And so I said, oh, yes, I'm going to support this book, but boy, I hope it's good. I hope I actually like what he has to say. And I got into reading the book, and it was just one thing after another after another. I've read so many different books recently for soul care and emotional health, and I learned so much in there, Marc, that some of the theology and things that you taught in there in the beginning and the things that you brought to light, it really blessed me, and I went through that book very, very fast. And so, again, I took highlights, but I'm going to get another copy and make more highlights and just kind of spend some more time really dwelling on some of the things that you talked about. So that is my very long introduction. Marc, I'd like you to go ahead and introduce yourself and just kind of explain, tell us about who you are, what you do, and then I'd love to hear some about how the book started.
Sure. Well, I'm a many hat wearing person. My main hat is that I'm a pastor. That's the language most people know. Technically, I'm the teaching elder at Bridge City Community Church. I'm one member of a team of elders that we co-equally lead the body together, but my primary responsibility is teaching. And I've been in some pastoral capacity at Bridge City for about 18 years. And in that time, Bridge City has been probably 4 different churches, and I've been in about, 17 different roles. And I don't know, I can't say if the existence of Bridge City has been a great spiritual benefit to other people, but it has been the roller coaster of my spiritual journey for the last significant season of my adult life. It has been the place where I've learned the most about myself, about my relationship with God, and it's also the place where I went through the journey that I share about in The Wisdom of Your Heart, which is about finding myself a confident, type A, get the job done kind of person, finding myself being a functional, depressed person, which is a reality that a lot of people don't even know exists. We have a picture that depressed people lie on the couch and, eat ice cream late at night and can't get anything done. And if you were a church member or someone who only saw me from a distance, if you only sat in church and saw what happened, or if you saw me from a distance, most of those people had no idea there was anything going on, because I was able to muscle up myself and use a lot of willpower and perform well on the weekend. And then I would get home and I would crash and I would be useless for 3 or 4 days, just on a couch, unable to be helpful to my wife. We had 2 small children during that season, and she was essentially a single mom who was also trying to manage the emotional needs of a grown person who didn't have the tools to handle his own emotions. And so I wear other hats as well, but that's the one that led to the book. And I didn't set out to write the book. It wasn't a plan that I was going to write a book. It was just that I had this experience. I ended up in a place that was really dark and painful, and the tools in my backpack didn't work. I'm a child of the church. My dad was a pastor. I've been in church, multiple times every week since the day I was born. I went to church school. I have a degree in theology, and I've been to all the conferences and trainings, and still all of that did not equip me to deal with the emotional wreckage, the struggle, the damage that was flowing out in my life. And it began when I finally realized that I couldn't fix this myself. That's my coping mechanism. My whole life has been, if something happens, I'll work harder. If something's difficult, I'll put in more hours. If I don't know how to do it, I'll get a book or I'll take a class and I'll learn how to do it. And you can't work your way out of burnout. You can't work harder your way out of depression. And so my toolbox was empty. And I could see the trajectory of my life. I could see the things that I cared about heading off a cliff. And I didn't want that. I didn't know what to do. And so I began to open up to a couple well-placed, close friends. They actually probably prodded me more than I opened up, I think is really the case, because they were both men who had a lot of traumatic experience in their own life. And I think they could see me more clearly than I could see me. And over the period of time with their prodding, I began to take some steps of self-care. Went to a retreat for pastors dealing with burnout. Came back from that convinced that I needed to be in therapy. Got a referral for an amazing therapist. Spent a long time in that process with a bookshelf full of journals and conversations and tears and difficult conversations with my wife. And the book is just one of the fruits of that journey. I'm not fixed or well. In fact, this week I've been struggling with some really heavy depressive thoughts, but I understand what's happening in my heart and in my body. And I have tools to deal with that in a way that's better than having no tools at all. And I can see some days, I can see a destination that's a lot better. And there are even times when I stop and realize that I'm happy, which I don't know if I'd ever had that experience before 5 years ago.
I can really relate to some of that. I think a lot of people can. Just some of the Christian mentality even is part of American mentality. Work, keep doing better, keep trying harder. And it just doesn't work that way. We can succeed at certain things, or we can even look like we're doing great Christian things, but somewhere it's taking a toll on the inside. And I can relate to kind of a collapse as well. Some people in my audience know that we did a season of serving where we fostered multiple children, and came back.
That's hard work.
It was a very unique setup. We moved to do it, and we were living on a property that was owned by agencies. We were out in the country on 156 acres, which sounded delightful, with up to 12 kids in the home.
Wow.
And I'm an introvert.
Yeah.
And I thought I was done raising kids. So the dynamics were extreme. And after 14 months of doing that, I came back, and we'd already overserved before that, took a year break, and then went and done this. And when I came back, it was signs of PTSD, depression, anxiety, grief, everything. And just everything shook up in my world, and I couldn't do anymore.
Wow.
So I had to learn to say no. I had to learn to tend to the reasons why I couldn't say no.
Yes, that's huge. That is it right there.
Yes. And like you, still on that journey. And it's a blessing and an honor, I think, to be able to get share part of that journey, knowing that you're still on it, but at a place where God's brought you to enough to say, wow, this is really changed everything. And so I'm excited to hear that you've been through that part of the journey. You're still processing it. You're still growing, not saying, hey, I've got it all figured out, but man, God showed some incredible things, and you're bringing those truths to people in this book. So I would like to hear a little bit about how the book is kind of laid out. I know there's, like 4 parts of it, and kind of some key highlights of it, what you'd like to share so that people have an understanding of what is inside of there.
Sure. So I tell my story in the book, but the book is not a memoir. My story is a diving board into the conversation. Yeah. And so the beginning of the book starts with my story and kind of explaining where I was at, and really surfacing that in my background, in my upbringing, in my religious training, in the church that I grew up with, I was given a collection of preconceptions. In the book, I call them maps, a collection of preconceptions about emotions and spirituality that were very active in my life and were bearing consequences. And there's cultural preconceptions and there's church preconceptions, and so in the book, we talk about, there's this preconception that our emotional and rational mind are these completely separate, unrelated things. We talk about being left brain or right brain. We talk about people that are very feeling and people that are very rational, and that those are separate, unrelated things. And that's not factually true. It's not medical. We'll talk about that later in the book. And then we talk about some of the myths that come in the church particularly. So we talk about the idea that emotions always lie to us. That's that scripture that came to your mind, right? The heart is deceitful above all things. And that passage, that was a part of my upbringing. I was raised being told that emotions are on your best day distractions, and on your worst day, they are temptations from the pit of hell. And if you feel something leading you away from what you know to be true, and know to be true really is just a reference to your church's theology or the interpretation your pastor has or whatever it is, then you know that you're being tempted, and you have to ignore that. That's the solution, right? You ignore it, you repress it, you do the right thing because it's the right thing. It doesn't matter what you feel. You'll feel different in the morning. And that map is really destructive because it teaches us to ignore our emotions. And emotions are a natural inbuilt part of who we are. They're a response of body and mind that happens automatically in relationship to things happening in our inner life and our outer circumstances. As you grow more spiritual, you're not going to grow out of having emotions. So if you believe that your emotions always deceive you and the only way to solve that is to repress them, then you are choosing to go around life with one eye covered. Right? You're choosing to go around life without access to an important piece of information. In the book, I use the example of the engine warning light on the dashboard of your car. That light is there. It has a reason. It's meant to give you information. And when we believe that myth that emotions always lie, it's like driving around with duct tape over that light.
Yes.
And you just drive, you don't care what it says. You hear some grindy noises in the engine. Maybe somebody tells you, man, a lot of smoke is coming out of your car, but you just don't even want to pay attention to that. And that myth leads to that kind of behavior. It leads to denial. And there's some others, but the one that's really important is two that come together. We believe God has no emotions, and that can seem really abstract and theological, but here's where the rubber meets the road. If you grew up in the church like I did, then you've been raised all your life knowing that the right way to live is to be like God, right? To become godly. That's more the way we say it, because we don't want to be like God, like Adam and Eve, right? We don't want to pursue deity, but to be more godly. We sing our songs about being like Jesus. I want to be more like him. And so if in your mind you have this story that God has no emotions or that God is distant from emotional reality, and at the same time you believe your goal as a follower of Jesus is to become more like God, then you've created yourself a mental picture that the more spiritual I become, the less emotional I will be. And that's incredibly destructive, because it means, once again, that you're cutting yourself off from this incredibly important, rich source of information and intuition that God created us with.
Yeah, I think it's the way that we see God, either as flat emotionally, or in my case, I grew up in the Lutheran church, and I remember, the Garden of Gethsemane painting, where he's so somber, and I'm more of a somber type of person. That's more my personality, but I would sit there and I would cry for Jesus. How sad he was. And so it has been a huge journey for me to see other emotions in God. And so for me, it was seeing God happy. For some people, that's more of the way they see him. But do you find that to be true? Like, we kind of have this very limited expression of Jesus in our mind, maybe from pictures or the way that we were brought, whatever experience we've had with God, that kind of thing.
I think that's true. I think that many religious traditions really focus on and emphasize a particular aspect of Christ's experience, so it's not uncommon, Catholic traditions, a lot of them really focus on the passion, you have the Stations of the Cross. And so it's a spiritual practice. It's a discipline to identify with the suffering of Christ. And that's not a bad thing. But if that's the only picture you have of God, then that means that you don't have a model, you don't have a picture for seeing a whole or a more full experience. I remember incredibly impactful. Many years ago, I saw there was I'm trying to remember the name of it. There was a movie. It was a video series that came out that was basically a video translation of the Gospel of Matthew.
Okay.
It was called The Visual Bible, was the main thing. And they ended up doing just Matthew, and I think they did Acts maybe. I don't know. And the Jesus in this particular video was revolutionary to me, because it was the first time I'd seen a video of Jesus where the guy was winsome. His facial expression and his gestures were welcoming and warm. And even when he said things, because the text of the film was just strictly scripture, they didn't interpret anything at all other than just the scripture. Even when he said things that were hard, he said them with a personal presence that was gentle and kind. And the mental picture I had was not like that at all. It was this serene, dour sort of guru who was very level and calm and sort of spoke, with the weight that everything I say is scripture, and all of these are going to have verse citations on them. So listen very carefully. Right. And this other portrayal that I saw, he was like a real human being with sadness and joy and happiness. And I'd never conceptualized that before. And so if you come from a religious tradition that hones in on either God being sort of flat or the sad, the passion of Christ, that is one of those maps. That's one of those sets of preconceptions you've been given. And it's not that maybe the map is wrong, but it may not be a complete picture. And for you to have, limited. Yeah, for you to have a healthy spiritual journey and relationship with God, you need a much bigger picture than that.
Yeah, no, I love that. And that's one of the things that I just keep coming back to repeatedly for the last few years is God is bigger than we could ever fathom. Yeah. And, you talk about being made in the image of God and that God does have emotions. And I think that understanding that as part of being image bearers of Christ, just being intentional to really consider that and how that impacts our lives. I think a lot of us just don't go there. Right. To consider God as the emotional God, and that means that just because I'm dealing with quote unquote negative emotions, it's all bad. Right. I think you gave some of the examples of, Jesus weeping and being angry, how we perceive these and kind of shove it aside. Don't ever be angry. Right. That type of thing.
Right. Well, I think that we have categorized emotions. I mean, you even used the phrase just a moment ago, the negative emotions.
Right.
So we think of fear and anger and shame and jealousy, and those things are negative emotions, and happiness, joy, anticipation, those are positive emotions. And in the church, not only do we use the labels negative and positive, but we also sometimes cram in the label sinful and holy in there. Yeah. Right. So that some of these emotions are sinful emotions and some of them are holy. And I just think that construct is really unhelpful and wrong. Emotions in themselves don't have moral weight one way or the other. It's not a sin to have an emotion. It's not a sin to get angry. It's not a sin to feel sadness. It's not a sin to feel jealousy. Like, emotions in themselves are an indicator of something that's going on in your inner landscape and outer reality, and they give you motive energy, right? They bring the energy that causes you to make a decision or take an action. So where the moral quality comes in, I think this is how the church has to change the conversation. Where the moral quality comes in is in my response to the emotion. That if I get jealous and as a result of that become controlling and demand that my wife only ever check in with me by text every 20 minutes and so that I know where she is and who she's talking to, my response has been sinful. It's not my right. She's not morally obligated to me. She's a free moral agent, right? But that feeling of jealousy, that is an emotion that says a relationship I'm rightfully entitled to is threatened. That's useful information. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Like maybe there's something going on between us where intimacy is failing, and intimacy is a function of time spent together, and we're not spending as much time together as we used to. And so then I see her having a wonderful conversation with some other person and I feel jealousy. The jealousy is not talking about her. it's talking about me, right? It's talking about this warning coming up inside me saying, hey, there's something with your relationship that needs attention. So it's not sinful to have the emotion. It's sinful to respond to the emotion in a way that's hurtful or selfish or based on pride, all of the things we learn about in the life of Christ. And so that means emotional maturity is not about growing out of emotions. It's about growing into godly, life-giving, appropriate ways to handle and respond to our emotions.
And I think you just kind of summarized what you mean by the wisdom of your heart. Like what I took out of reading some of that in the book was the wisdom that we get from being informed by our emotions about what's going on,
right?
And kind of changing that dialogue of how can we kind of better understand that it's not just negative in a connotation that says it's bad, shove it aside. It feels hard to go have anger, to have jealousy, but what do we do with that? And there is wisdom in dealing with that. Would you agree? Is that part of?
I think that is exactly how we grow.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like you said in the intro, you said one of the things in your journey was learning how to say no. And then you backtracked with this amazing statement. You said actually dealing with the reasons why saying no is hard. That's the absolute truth. Saying no is very easy. No, it's like one of the shortest words. Barely requires any effort. Saying no is easy. The reason saying no is hard is because we have emotional attachments to something around that, right? Like I need that person to think I'm a great servant. I need that person to think I'm available. If I say no to them, then maybe they're not going to be available for me next time I need them. Whatever. There's something in the constellation of our thoughts and heart that's why saying no is hard. And how you get there is by processing your emotions. Yeah. Right? You go, man, they want me to do this thing. And honestly, I hate doing that thing. I don't want to do that thing. Why on earth am I having a hard time saying no to them? What is it? Well, and then you start deconstructing it. Well, if I say no to them, I think this might happen or this might happen. And then you have to ask yourself, well, is that a reasonable thing? Like, should I be worried or concerned about that? And that process of reflection is where the wisdom comes from. And I think the reason we don't do it is because we just are so uncomfortable that we want to change the discomfort as fast as possible. Yes, which first, I'll backtrack just a second. You talked about the reflection, and earlier you mentioned that you had some good brothers who helped you work through part of that, right? Like you, hey, when Julie, you were learning. Let me interrupt. Can you hear my dog? I don't think so. Okay, he's barking, and so if you hear him enough that it's going to be a problem, tell me, and I'll go and deal with him. You got it. Okay, so back up to whatever your intro was there. Sorry. That's okay. I was mentioning that I think you mentioned earlier, if I recall correctly, that when you were reflecting and starting to realize why these emotions were coming up, what was going on inside of you, you also had men to help you kind of reflect in an honest way. I don't remember exactly what you said, but community. I'm getting at community as a aspect of kind of going through that process and being able to be honest with other people and share. There's something else going on, and I'm trying to explore this. If we have some safe people around us that can help us kind of go through that. But then you brought up, I think, how our brains want to jump into safety. We don't want to deal with that discomfort. And you also talked about brain science, which I know you talked about in the book. So could you elaborate on that a little bit? Sure. That's the third part of the book. So the first part kind of lays out the myths. The second part goes into scripture. I come to this as a child of the church. I come to this as a pastor. I want to understand what scripture has to say about it. So the second part kind of goes into Jesus' emotions, the emotions of God across scripture, and some ways to handle what that might mean. Because that's one of the fears people have when you think about emotions is, well, if God has emotions, does that mean God's not trustworthy? God's changing? That seems to contradict scripture. What do we do with that? So that's the second part. And I love that. I loved some of the things that you pointed out in there about the dualism and just how things changed in the church. It was really helpful for me. Oh, good. That second part. Good. That's one of those maps. We've been handed that idea that everything having to do with our body is bad. Yeah. And there's probably 100 podcasts you could do around that because thoughts, body image, all of these things that we struggle with. That's that dualistic heritage. The body's bad. And then the third part is, well, what do we understand now about emotions? For the longest time, people who studied, psychology, the way the body works, all that, just kind of chalked up emotions as something that were unstudyable. They're completely subjective. They're inside the black box of our mind. There's really no way to get at them. It's really been recently, like even the last 20 years or 30 years at most, where we've begun to have the tools, particularly the fMRI studies, where we can look at brain imagery while people are having different experiences and see what's happening in the brain. It's only with the advent of that we've even been able to peek under the hood at all. And it's brand new. It's stuff that we're just beginning to learn, and it's so fascinating to me. One of the things that came up completely shocked me when I heard it was that a lot of the studies about how emotion is processed in the brain and what's happening have shown that we experience emotion in our body before our conscious minds are even aware that we're experiencing an emotion. And there's all different kinds of ways that they test for this. There has to do with micro expressions, facial micro expressions, has to do with perspiration, and then they correlate that with brain study, with fMRI images. And it's pretty consistent that we will have an emotional reaction within our body that we're not even aware that we're having, which is one of the underlying features of things like bias, racial bias, gender bias. These are things that are so deeply rooted in us, we don't even know. Like, it's not like we have a visceral reaction. I think that's something, currently the topic of race is big in our culture. And there's a lot of people like me who grew up in sort of middle America who would say, well, I'm not racist. And what we mean is, I don't ever feel like intense anger or hatred about someone who's a different race. That never happens. I'm not racist. But it's very consistent that people who grew up like me, with lots of people who look like me around them, when they go and they do fMRI studies around this, their brain will respond negatively towards faces of people of other colors. That doesn't mean that you're a moral failure. Right? That doesn't mean that you're actively sinning against God and your neighbor. It means that from your life story and the way that you grew up, you have these embedded expectations and your brain behaves a certain way. You have a reaction before you even know you have a reaction. And that just is stunning to me, because it means, first off, I'm not as in control of my thoughts as I like to think I am. That's really important. It means I need to be a little bit humble about the things that I think and the things that I say I believe. And then it means for emotion that I need to learn how to pay attention. One of the things I share in the book is that I in my journey of emotions, really anger was the emotion that I only had connection with. And whenever I had emotional disturbance inside of me, which could be really, frankly, any emotion, because emotions, feel uncontrolled. And part of my story is about controlling pain and avoiding pain. And all emotions sort of create energy that's uncertain. So whenever I'd have an emotional reaction, the way it came out was anger. And I could be in that place. It felt like I could make something happen. I felt comfortable with that. I knew what it felt like. But I didn't have connection with a wider range of other emotions. When I was in therapy, one of the things that my therapist helped me see, and this is the power of community. This wasn't even her magic ability as a therapist. It was just having another person in the room listening to you. Was that she pointed out after a number of sessions how frequently I would talk about having stomach discomfort, and that would align with the times that we were talking about when I was anticipating conflict. When I was upset at somebody, or somebody was upset with me, and I was worried about having a conversation with them, or I was feeling offended. And at the same time, I would feel stomach discomfort. And I had all these reasons for that. I ate bad Chinese food yesterday, or, I've been really feeling under the weather lately. I've been one of those guys that always had a bottle of Tums in my backpack, and it was just a part of my life. I just felt like this was something I deal with. And it was my therapist saying, hey, look, do you notice this connection? And then we began to pay attention to it. And over time, I learned that my gut is actually a really excellent predictor of whether I'm entering into conflict or not, even when I don't know it in my mind. That I would feel that twisting, and I would stop and go, okay, that thing's happening again. What's going on? I don't feel upset. I don't think oh, I have a meeting with somebody this afternoon. And
Right.
and I wasn't even conscious of it. I was not aware,
Right.
but here my body is saying, hey, pay attention. Here's a thing. You need to
Mm-hmm.
be noticing this. And that's the truth for all of us. And so it gives me access to begin to stop, to slow down the process, to understand what's happening in me. It also gives me access to have compassion for other people.
Yeah.
Because now I can know this is happening for them too. And if it's happening for them too, maybe that means that there's a initial visceral reaction. I had a
Mm-hmm.
conversation in the car to school this morning, in the car line. My daughter and my son work really hard in the morning to get their morning stuff done so they have a little bit of free time before we go to school.
Okay.
And my son is much more effective at getting that done than my daughter is. And so he was done and he headed out and he was playing in the driveway, riding bikes or a skateboard or whatever.
Uh-huh.
My daughter finished up and headed out and she saw him, and he was riding a skateboard that she had just a couple weeks ago purchased on her own with her own money.
Mm-hmm.
And she saw him riding it and just immediately lost it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she's yelling at him from the top of the stairs and get off my skateboard and became a big giant thing. So we processed it, and in the car on the way to school we talked about it, and we actually got to talk about this. And I asked her, hey, Em, what happened in your body when you came out the door and you saw Lucas?
Mm-hmm.
What happened for you inside your body? And she had to stop and think for a minute, because that's not a normal question.
Mm-hmm.
And then she was like, well, my fist clenched up. I was like, oh yeah, that's one. I do that too. What else happened? Well, I my face scrunched up and my neck went. And I was like, yes, I know that happens to me too. Right. Well, think about other times in your life when that happens. What's going on when your fists fall up and your shoulders clench up? What's happening? She goes, well, he was, and she wanted to say he was hurting me. That's what she wanted to say, but it wasn't her, right? And so then we got to talk about how, anger is the emotion you feel when you feel violated. And here's something you bought with your money and he's using it without permission. Did that feel did that feel unfair to you? That was language that made sense to her. She's 11.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Did that feel like it was unfair? Yes, it was unfair. Well, why? Because he needs to know that, and so then we had this whole conversation that came out of that. And it was actually started about, hey, what's going on? Why did you burst out? Well, I felt this way. Well, what was happening?
Right.
Well, now when that happens, I hope if we have that kind of conversation more often, maybe when those markers begin to show up in her body, she gets a warning sign and she's able to stop and go, okay, I'm feeling violated. I need to check and see if that's really fair. Is it fair that I'm being violated? Is that really true? Do I need to get some more information? Can I slow down the train enough to respond in a way that doesn't hurt the heart of people that I care for?
Yeah, that's so valuable, because our tendency is to stop the external action immediately and completely ignore whether or not there's ever an internal anything that's going on.
Right.
Like when we fostered, that's my whole parenting paradigm shifted, because you can't do things the way that you're used to doing, or at least the way I was used to doing them. And so I remember one of my sons saying at one point, because we had just quite a bit of undisciplinary, saying no, screaming their trauma, and then there's all kinds of things. And so one time my son was so upset, and he is a justice dude. I mean, he's like, it's right or it's wrong, and that's it. And so his solution was, in his tears, why can't we just pay the Congress or the people $1 million so they can change the law, because he needs a spanking.
Right.
And honestly, there's a part of me that's where my gut reaction wants to go when a child is misbehaving, but it's not the answer. I want to just make it stop. And I think we do that as adults for ourselves and for the people in our lives so quickly and easily.
Yes.
And so that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about your book, to bring more awareness to our own stuff, so that we can have a little bit of a slowdown, more of compassion, like you're saying, for other people. When there's an external action going on, we may even respond very quickly with, just that really quick negative. But I think the more that we kind of take that time to go, what is it that's going on inside of us? We can understand what's going on with other people. And then it bridges this gap of, in like we talked about in the beginning in Christianity, just do, work harder.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We leave room for some of those discomfortable things where growth really happens.
Right.
And unity can happen, and reconciliation can happen. And
yeah, I think that's you're exactly right. And the reason we don't go there, and I think the reason why so many Christians are stuck at a level of spiritual and emotional maturity that's not very high, is because our biggest drive is to get to comfort.
Yeah.
Right? The God of all comfort, the God who wipes away our tears. That's what we want. We want to feel okay. And this has been interesting to see even in the life of my church. I began to share these things in my journey, even when I was going through it. I mean, I came to a spot where I felt in my heart that the only credibility I had was just to tell the truth about my story, that I was not in a place where I could just get up and try and preach happy, hopeful things if I was not feeling happy and hopeful. I could preach what the word said, but I also needed to acknowledge I'm not feeling this today, right? And when I began to do that, that was a dividing line for some people. There were people that couldn't bear having me be up front talking about pain and depression and struggle and not having won the victory. And there were other people that it was life for them. It was the first time in their life that they have had a spiritual leader say, I'm not doing well today. Can you walk with me? And that, that requires being comfortable with discomfort.
Yeah.
Right. Like we have to be able to say, this doesn't feel good. It's not going to last forever. I trust that God is with me, but it doesn't feel good right now. And I think a lot of the ways that we respond to emotional outbursts, whether it's adults dealing with someone difficult at work or parents, it's a big issue for parents, is that when our kids blow up, what we do is very often more about managing our emotions than it is about helping them. Right? My daughter's crying. I don't like my daughter to be in pain. I want her to stop crying. I say that. There, sweetheart. I love you. Stop crying. It's going to be okay.
Right.
I haven't maybe even bothered to listen to why she's crying. Right? She's sad about something. Sadness is an emotion of loss. She feels like she's lost something. And I didn't listen to her, and I just want her to stop. I want her to be happy again, either because it's inconvenient to me and I don't want to deal with it, or more truthfully, because it triggers my own emotional anxiety about those feelings that I don't want to deal with. And so emotional maturity actually is an invitation for us to go into these painful places, not by ourselves. It's not going to last forever. It's not that we all have to become depressive, but that we have to be able to go into that. Like if I'm going to be of help to her, I have to be able to listen to why she's feeling what she's feeling and not just rush to there, everything's going to be okay. And as a pastor, I have to do the same.
Yeah.
Like I had a conversation once with a mom who was really struggling because her young daughter was starting to do self-harm. She had a 10-year-old who was starting to self-harm. And that's horribly traumatic. I mean, to think that that's happening, to feel blame or guilt, like maybe I contributed to that in some way. There's grief because now your dream of that perfect child that you always believed your kid was going to be, that dream is gone. And so you have to grieve that loss.
Yeah.
And I was just listening, and she was sharing it, and she was talking about the struggle and the frustration that she had. And then she was relating that she'd talked with some other Christian friend, and the Christian friend was encouraging her from the word, and just, this is hard, but God's not going to leave you behind. He's promised to not leave you as an orphan. God, heals the wounded. God is going to be strong in her life, and she's going to be fine. And I said, super awesome pastor move. I said, or maybe she won't be. Maybe she won't be fine. And maybe she's going to deal with depression and suicidal thoughts for the rest of her life. And it was like the conversation became real. And she didn't break down in sadness. She gasped and thanked me for actually being able to talk about that with her. And then we talked about what that would look like. What would it look like to be a faithful follower of Jesus with a child that was hurting themselves that you couldn't fix?
Wow.
And how do you walk faithfully in that? And how do you love her? And how do you represent God's heart of love and healing to her if she's not well? And I'm not saying that's going to be the outcome.
Right.
But the other Christian was trying to get her out of the space of fear.
Mm-hmm.
and just say, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. And we
Mm-hmm.
don't ever have the right to tell people it's going to be fine.
We don't
know.
Exactly. I'm so with you on that, Mark. Yes.
We're not God. We don't control the future. We can say, I'll be with you as best as I'm able. We can say, you're not alone. The Lord is with you. We can say that Jesus walked this path and understands the pain that you're feeling. We can say that God works towards healing, and sometimes God heals amazingly, and sometimes God heals over time, and sometimes God heals when you stand before him. Like, those are things that are true that we can say.
Yeah.
But when we tell someone it's going to be okay, we have to peel the lid up a little bit and look inside and see, are we telling them that because we need to believe that?
Yeah.
Because our emotions are uncomfortable with the idea that this situation may not get better in the way we hope for.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a concept that I've been thinking about and writing about a lot lately, which is about passive faith versus active faith. And in that example, the way that I would kind of liken that is, I think, so for me, I just would go into more of the victim mentality. And when I hear that, sometimes it's taking any action or onus on me to own my own walk and journey, and that it's all just going to be God taking care of everything. And God is sovereign, but one of the things that he specifically revealed to me was my passivity in saying, I've already given you what you need, now walk in it. And so, kind of that example that you're talking about, I think when we get into that discomfort, it's easier to just kind of give up and say, well, God's in charge. He's going to make it all better. So I don't even have to think about it.
Right.
I don't have to feel it. I don't have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And that's really a passivity. Whereas the perseverance of active faith is listening to the Spirit, going into those places with God, letting the Spirit transform our hearts from the inside out, persevering through the part that's uncomfortable and even painful at times, so that the real transformation, the real beauty can come out at the other side.
Yeah, that's the only way we can grow. That's exactly it.
Yeah. So, oh man, I'm loving this conversation. Okay. I wanted to ask you too about kind of the what you've seen as a result of, you shared some of this before you wrote the book, what you said with your church, but then also with writing the book. Like, what kind of impact are you seeing with other people who are hearing the message or reading the book, that kind of thing?
Well, the book is brand new.
Yeah,
and so there's very little feedback I've gotten about the book so far. I've had a few people reach out to me. I've had one person in particular that texted me and just felt like this was exactly the thing that God needed for their heart, and I'm excited for that.
Good.
But I know when I've talked to people in the last few years about my journey and what lies behind the book, the biggest thing for me is having Christians realize that it is not a lack of faith for us to talk about these things.
Oh, good. Yeah.
That's it. That's the thing. Like you and I have different temperaments. We have different stories, which lead us to experience our emotions in different ways. And so no matter how much I can lay out emotions in the book, it's never going to be a formula. Because how it happens inside of you and how it happens inside of me, it's going to be different. But if we grew up in the church and we were told that a person of faith never doubts, a person of faith, moves forward, like, that I'm going to walk forward in the Lord means having confidence and I'm going to live in the joy of the Lord. I don't even know some days what that phrase even means. I've been told 1,000 times I need to live in the joy of the Lord. And we have these expectations of what it's going to look like to be a person of faith. And then life happens, and life is full of this stuff we're talking about.
Right.
Full of broken promises and losses. It's full of, it's full of emotions that we don't understand and sometimes feel out of our control. And then we have someone in the church tell us something that may be, useful or true theologically, but can be used in a way that's emotionally manipulative. I share the story in the book about a time my wife and I went to the coast to visit some friends. We got to their house before they were home. And so they'd left the door before us. We went in, and they got home a little while later. They were coming from a funeral. That a girl, I think she was in 6th grade, who was a schoolmate of one of the children, had drowned in a riptide in the ocean. And it was a big event in the community, and the school, it's a public school, had actually planned a memorial service for her. And so they were coming back from that memorial service. And they were angry. The mom had been texting me on the drive back, and the kids were freaked out. And what had happened was that the pastor that the school had invited to lead this memorial service had basically taken his time for spoken word and used it to preach a sermon on the sovereignty of God, and said to this gathering of public school students and their families, if you're sad today about the death of this person, then you don't trust God's goodness. Okay, so if you and I want to sit down and talk about the theology of God's sovereignty and exactly what that means and how it plays out in human life, that's fine. That's good theology. We can talk about it. There's scripture. There's different viewpoints. That's a great conversation to have. It is not a great conversation to have at a funeral.
Oh, man.
Right? It is emotionally manipulative. It's pastoral malpractice to say to grieving people that your tears mean you don't trust God.
Yeah.
Because first off, tears happen. It's a natural response of grief and loss. Even if, and this is not my theology, even if God allowed that girl to drown according to his sovereignty because in some way that brings glory to him. That's not my theology. But even if that is your theology, you still have to allow the reality that emotions are real. And when you lose somebody, you are going to feel grief and loss and sadness. And it's not a lack of faith. It's not a lack of trust in God. It's you living into who God made you to be. God designed the system. And that notification of grief and loss is important. You have to process through it.
Yeah.
My suspicion is that grief is one of the tools that allows us to reimagine our life in a new way. That we have to work through it to see what our life would be like without that person or that precious thing. And if we tell people, no, you can't. In this house of God, you can't do that. You trust God. You trust that God's doing good things. When you feel those dark thoughts, you put them away. When we tell people to do that, we're telling them, ignore what God has created you to be. Ignore the emotion that God's given you to process through this loss. And that doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem in keeping with the story of creation. It doesn't seem in keeping with the character of Jesus. Like, just everything about it is wrong to me.
Yeah. Wow. That's hard for me to hear because I could just imagine the pain that other people experience in hearing that, don't be sad. It's not trusting God. And that just, yeah. Well, what that makes me think of, I got a printout from you. It was a download, and I think it highlighted some of the steps that we can take to walk through our own journey. I think you highlight this maybe in the journaling course. Am I correct? Or
well, the journaling course is a little bit separate, but at the end of the book, there is a journaling process that I talk about. Chapter 16 is called the 5 A's, and it talks about a process of how you can kind of unpack and relate to your emotions. And it's the warning up front is that it's not something that you're going to just do off the cuff, off the top of your head after you've read the chapter one time. It's a skill set. And the best way to build it is to take time to go through it. For me, I had to do it in journaling. Maybe somebody else can do it in the confines of their mind. I think that's really tough because it's hard. It's hard to analyze and review your thoughts with the same mind that is thinking the thoughts at the time. And so journaling gets it out of your head on paper. It forces you to slow down, which that's a really important piece of dealing with our emotions, is being able to stop and be with them. We want to rush past them. We want to get out of them if they're uncomfortable. And so journaling is slow. It makes you stop and be with, and especially if you're writing about the experience, you might even have to relive it a little bit, and that helps get it out of your head so that you can reflect on it. And so the process is built around the sequence of emotions and really getting aware of what's happening. So before we get to the journaling process, one of the things that I share in the book is that our best understanding of how emotions work in the body and the brain looks something like this. This is a simplification. This is an easy way for people to get their head around it. The first thing is that every emotion you feel, when you identify that you're feeling something, let's just say anger, because that's an easy one to talk about. When you feel anger, you're actually feeling a composite experience that's made up of 4 different parts. Those 4 different parts happen sequentially, but they happen so fast that it feels like one experience to you. So the first thing is that you experience an emotional reaction in your body. Something happens, Neurons fire, chemicals get distributed, hormones move around, something happens. Your shoulders tighten up, you get the clenching in your gut, your face makes a certain shape. These things they just happen. They're autonomous, they're not sinful. You can't really control them. Even if you're amazing at this, they just happen. That happens first. The second thing that happens is that you have a sort of a cloud of habitual thoughts surface in your mind. And these aren't like the intentional thoughts, like I'm thinking right now talking to you. These are just kind of the thoughts that are floating around. They just emerge. And I say that they're habitual because you and I have been experiencing our emotions since we were born. And when you do something over and over and over again, it becomes a habit. The way that your brain works, the patterns of response, they become reflexive. And so over the course of your life, based on your story and your experiences, you have certain kinds of thought, tones of thought that go with certain feelings, right? So this is why, for example, it's very easy for some people, we talk about them having a victim mentality. And what that really means is when something happens where they're violated, the very first thing that comes to mind is this idea that they're out to get me. I'm never going to get a break. God must be punishing me. I'm so unlucky. Those thoughts are thoughts that they've rehearsed in their lifetime many, 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 many times to the point that they're not conscious. They're not causing the thought to happen right now. They're not thinking, oh, I'm a victim. They're experiencing habitual thoughts. And those habitual thoughts are tied into that body response. They just come up, right? And so you'll have the very first thing is the reaction in your body. The second thing that happens is you have this tone of thought arise. And that tone of thought will be in keeping with whatever the bodily reaction is. So joyful thoughts or happy thoughts or angry thoughts or whatever they are, you just kind of have the tone of your mind is shifted in that direction. The third thing is now your conscious mind, that front part of your brain, is aware that something is happening. And so your conscious mind, which is about explaining and drawing connections between things, your conscious mind looks around to find what caused this. And primarily, I think, because we're so wired up to avoid discomfort, our brain loves shortcuts. And so what we very often do, I want to say always, it's probably not true, but very often is we jump to a conclusion. Our brain picks a target. That's what caused this thing in me. And now as soon as the target's identified, you get a kind of mental tunnel vision. That's the only thing you can really think about. That person that's offending you or that irritating sound that's getting under your skin or whatever the thing is. Like that's the thing that's on your brain. And even if you try to push it away, your brain is just like, that's the thing. My kids just have to be quiet. It's the 100 millionth time I've told them, whatever it is, that's the thought. And then the fourth thing that happens is, and this is all very, very, very quick. The fourth thing is that your brain constructs a story to explain why you feel how you feel. So I'm sitting at the kitchen table, got my iPad out, and I'm writing in my happy space, doing stuff that I like. And my wife pokes her head around the corner and she says, are you going to get dinner for the kids? Totally natural question. It's an appropriate question. We have dinner every day. It's on the regular schedule. So, obviously we don't have dinner elves. Somebody's responsible for dinner. Right. She's asking a question, right? She's just getting information. But what happens in me is that she puts her head around the corner. She says, hey, are you going to get dinner for the kids? And all of a sudden, like I clench up and like tightness goes across my shoulders. And this tone of thought is, I'm not enough. I'm not enough. I never work. No one appreciates all the work that I do around here. And she's obviously there. Her head is around the corner. So my brain's like, aha, problem, troublemaker. And the story that immediately comes up is she never thinks I do enough as a dad. Right. And that all happened in less than it took for me to clap. Right. And so then what happens without me having the understanding of that sequence is that I now react based on the story. But you have to be clear. The story is a fabrication. Right? I didn't stop and say, hey, are you feeling frustrated with me right now? Do you feel like me writing is not that I shouldn't be doing this right now? I didn't ask that. I just interpreted. And I'm reacting based out of that. And so then I'll probably, because I don't like conflict, what what I would do is I wouldn't snap back at her. I would say, sure, I'm getting dinner, but it would have a very slight little edge to it that is, sure, I'll get dinner. I wish you would do some of the work around here, right? And I'm not going to say that. I would never say that to her face because I don't like those kinds of conflicting conversations, but that's in my spirit, you know? And so now the interaction just rolls out from there, right? And now I'm responding to her. I'm responding based on the story I created.
Yeah.
Having negative emotions towards her, and they continue to stack up. It's not just that original emotional reaction. Now it's other things. And I'm pulling back into my backpack, and I'm remembering all the times that I wasn't appreciated and how she didn't support me and blah, blah, blah. All that adds up. And maybe we end up in a fight, or maybe we don't, because I'm really good at controlling my feelings. And it just means that we end up with distanced intimacy. Right. But that all came from this sequence of events that happened and the interpretation that I accepted. My brain offered an interpretation, and I didn't stop and go, oh, hey, I know that my brain is really good at making connections and making up stories. That's what brains are made to do. And maybe the story that I have just received isn't right. Maybe I need to check up and stop and see. Maybe I need to take a breath and say, talk to me about the plans for the evening. You know, what are you hoping could happen? You know, and now I can change the emotional tone. And so that first sequence of 4 things, that happens in every emotion: a bodily response, circulating habitual thoughts, honing in on a target, and creating a narrative. Why do I feel the way that I do? And so the journaling process basically takes you through that, where you walk through each of those pieces. And it starts with just being present, being aware. You know, sitting with your feelings. What am I feeling? What does it feel like? You know, what's happening in my body? What's happening in my mind? You know, I'm a knee bouncer.
Yeah.
All the time. I always have a part of my body moving. You know, well, I didn't know that was connected to emotional anxiousness. I didn't know that until I started tracking it with my therapist. Right. So something's happening in my body. Right.
Right.
So then the next step is, okay, what does this feel like? These things that are happening in my body. Have I had experiences in the past that this is similar to? You know, how would I label this emotion? One of the tools in the book is a basic emotional chart, which sounds like a crazy thing to need, but man, it helped me an enormous amount to be able to go, oh, right, anger is the emotion you feel when you have been violated. So why am I feeling angry at Christina right now when she asked me about making dinner for the kids? Well, I'm a writer, and I'm writing right now, and she's not respecting the fact that this is writing time. I have been violated. Now, okay, right. Now I can see why I'm feeling what I'm feeling. You know, and then you give it the name, and then you weigh it. The word that I use is assay, which comes from the Old West, the guys who would weigh the gold that the prospectors would bring in, and you weigh it. Is this valuable or not? Right? Not saying that the emotion's bad or sinful, but is it helpful right in this moment with what I want to have happen? In my relationship with Christine, is it helpful for me to be angry at her right now? Even if she is violating my time. Let's just assume that this was a set aside hour for writing and I had communicated that to her and we had good expectations about it and she really was violating it. Is the best way for me to handle that being angry at her and snapping at her? Not if I want intimacy.
Yeah, not usually.
Right.
Nope.
Right? Okay. So then I can wait and go, okay, how can I communicate my truth, which is I'm feeling violated right now. It's kind and respectful and good for her heart so that we can have engagement over it. And maybe we can say, oh, you know what? I'd really like you to not set your writing time during dinner. Well, that seems reasonable. Okay, let me set it earlier in the afternoon. And, you know, we come to those accommodations because we're able to talk about the emotional content without it being threatening, without it being anxious.
Yeah.
And then you do something with it. That's the apply at the end of the journal. I mean, the fact is emotions always give you energy to move. So what are you going to do with that?
Yeah.
An emotionally immature person is going to react in a way that's selfish based on feeling better as quickly as possible. An emotionally mature person is going to react in a way that's life-giving. Right? How can I use, even if it's anger about my writing time being violated, how can I channel that energy in a way that is intimacy building with Christina? There's a solution to that, but I'm not going to get it if I react. I have to stop and be conscious of these things that are happening in me.
Yeah, it's like I listen to New Life Ministries a lot, and that's like Henry Cloud and Townsend, Boundaries guys, and Stephen Arterburn and everything.
Yeah.
And the new book that Arterburn wrote is Take Your Life Back, and it's about not living a reactive life, but a responding.
Right.
And so those two terms have just keep coming to my mind, where there's some times where, for me, I've had to learn to be angry. I couldn't get angry. I was always depressed. And so learning how to not be reactive angry, but still allow anger in a way that was healing for me. And I remember one time when I was angry, and the counselor looked at me and he said, "That's actually a really good sign, Jolene." I said, "It is, because I'm really angry."
Did you have, in that moment, did you have like old church voices telling you that you shouldn't be?
I think at that time I was in the process of shifting that you can't be angry. Like, I don't know that I even knew that was a belief set that I had.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of coming to awareness at the same time. So I was trying to find space for myself to be angry and try to find safety to express the anger in a way that was healthy.
Yeah.
So it's been quite a journey through just the whole emotional healing for me, and the things that God keeps revealing. The process that you talked about in journaling, it's that was one of the other things that really stood out to me in your book too, because when you talk about assay and weighing things and the A's that you use, I have created a tool about 1.5 years ago that I just finally did a soft release, and I'm going to be tweaking it just a little bit and doing more of a course with it and adding content. And it's called Unleash Heart and Soul Care Sheets. And so the beginning of this process, it came about, I thought I was going to create a planner, because I couldn't write. I was going through so much at the time. I couldn't think creatively. And I was like, I'll just create a planner. Everybody's creating planners. That's easy. That's right. That's easy, right? So, but I kept going, but you have to ask yourself these questions. And then, well, what is this happening? And what is God saying to you? And like all these things that were part of the way that God wired me were coming to the surface. And what happened is I ended up creating a tool that I've been using, and I've had a couple hundred people use it, a bit large group of teens at a camp, and then a beta team that address kind of like what you're talking about, at least the starting point, like what's happening, getting your pen going, just identifying the facts, starting to get it downloaded and out of your head. And then what are the actual thoughts that you're having, no matter how bad they are, getting honest with those thoughts and just getting it out there. Just write it down. If you have to like cut that piece out, rip up your paper, burn it, I don't care. If you need to protect yourself, but you're having the thoughts.
Right.
And God already knows them, so just get honest with it. And then the feelings I have a 2-page feeling word chart, and encouraging people to use those feeling words either with a preposition. So like, I'm feeling violated when this happens, or because, and so it kind of expands on that feeling there, or just do a mess, or put one really big feeling word and a whole bunch of other, like whatever works for you, get it out. Yeah. And then inviting the Spirit into the process of some silence and listening to the Spirit speak, and then kind of going some scripture study. So
that's great.
It's kind of a foundational tool that will expand to identifying our destructive belief systems and what we're believing about ourselves, about God, about others. And so I have a lot to do on it yet, but I was really excited to hear your process too. And it reminded me that I had to include the response aspect to the tool that I was working on, because it is a critical piece. Like, what are you going to do with this next?
What are you going to do with it? You're going to do something.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing that I when I've talked with people, particularly people that have been more like me, that have been more repressed emotionally, one of the things I've talked to them about is, as I said, your emotions are just going to do what they're designed to do. They are going to do that in you, whether or not you deal with this. Right. And so you talked about earlier about not being angry, but being depressed. Well, that's what your emotion was doing. Right. It was like you had anger. You had anger. It just had no way to get out. And so the way that it was expressed in you was depression, which sounds weird that anger would be depression. But if you are really good at sublimating, it has to go somewhere. It has to motivate you to do something. And so that's what's going to happen. And so encouraging people to figure out what's the way to move this energy forward, and as a follower of Jesus, I want to move the energy forward in a way that's in keeping with the Spirit of Christ.
Yeah.
What's the way that I move this energy forward in a life-giving way? Well, that's part of learning, right? That's part of learning how does this show up in me? What do I do with it? Where does it go from here? That's really critical. I think that's awesome to get people to stop and think about that stuff. Even the idea that when you write out your emotions, you're going to have a bunch of different words all at once. That's something I don't really get into in the book that I probably should have. Part of what's difficult about emotions is that the complexity is often that we're feeling more than one thing at a time. And what do you do if you're feeling more than one thing and you're not supposed to feel any of the things you're feeling? Right? That's really difficult. And I found myself in places where I felt stuck. And my therapist called that being in a bind. And she explained it that you're feeling strongly about something and you're feeling strongly about something else. And those feelings are in conflict with one another. And so for whatever reason, you can't move, you can't resolve it, and that's not uncommon, so I think for Christians, here's a bind that you could put in the backpack of some large percentage of Christians, right? I have the emotion I feel, and so I feel motivated to do this, but I follow Jesus, and followers of Jesus are not supposed to have that kind of emotion. So now I'm in a bind because I feel my emotion and I feel shame. And how do I move out of that? I need to resolve the anger, but the only way to resolve the shame in that map system is to not have the anger. And so you're stuck. Yeah. And you can do that with, I know people. I grew up, this is kind of a joke. I grew up in a church where it was kind of an unspoken thing that if it feels good, it's probably sinful. Nobody preached that sermon, but that was kind of the tone. If it feels good to you, it's probably selfish and sinful. It's not serving others. It's not, following God is always going to be sacrificial, which means it's always going to feel a little uncomfortable. And if you're not in that place, then maybe you're being selfish and prideful and sinful. And so then I've known people that were in a bind over happy emotions. So they'd feel joy and shame, which is ridiculous.
I've been exactly there. Yes. That was actually one of the really powerful things for me. Are you familiar with EMDR?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So my first EMDR session in creating a safe place, and just for people who aren't familiar with it real briefly, it's eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. It's a natural way to release trauma in the brain. And my first session, I just, saw Jesus throughout this session, and the safe word that was supposed to bring me safety. At first I was like, I want to say delight, but it was supposed to be enjoy. But when she brought up the word enjoy as my safe word, I collapsed.
Oh my gosh. My
safe world, flooded, dark, everything bad. And I was panicking, and she's like, okay, we're putting that word away for a little while. And after that, I went, what is going on with me that the word enjoy caused me to shut down? Yeah. Complete panic. And so that's been another part of my journey to learn to enjoy God, to enjoy life in a different way. Right. And not feel guilty for enjoying the gifts that God's created in me or whatever. And, so yeah, I totally can relate to that.
Man, that just moves my heart. What a crazy thing. And that we in the church have done that to you, and we've done that to people, many people, where if you've been raised in the church, you've been raised since you were a child, you've been raised since before you were verbal, that God loves you. Your most important goal is to make God happy. And so you internalize that. Yeah. Right? Yep. And God's always with you. It's not like you can go home and be away from God and, enjoy some stuff. But then when you're back with God, we deal with that in families. We go to grandma's house, and when we're at grandma's house, we just don't do the things grandma doesn't like, so that we don't have to deal with the guilt and the shame. And then we go home and we do our own stuff. Right. But you can't do that with God. Right. Right. God's always there. Right. And so then you had that story internalized from your very earliest life. And now people are going to put onto that story. They're going to add on beliefs about God's expectations that aren't true or biblical. Right. So a follower of Jesus can never experience joy because that's selfish. But yet I'm supposed to have joy. And so then I felt guilty for not having joy. The joy of the Lord, right. Which is a completely different thing. Right. And so you carry that around, and now you're doing something that makes God happy, right? God is pleased when you feel delight, but then you feel shame about it because you want to honor God. That's just a ridiculous corner that we put people in.
Yeah, and I still feel that peeling away at times. He's done a huge work, but you know, it gets so ingrained, our destructive belief systems, and part of mine was also that I was to protect God, which was very faulty, and I kind of just sensed that early on as a child. I just felt like this responsibility, this weight, and that's why I think it was so powerful for me when God said, "I've already given you what you need to walk in it." Like, believe that I'm already with you, and that I'm the one protecting you. So, and the whole emotional journey has just been so powerful. And so, Marc, what I would like to ask towards the end, two things. At the very close, I want to just kind of get a highlight of what you share on your blog and other things that people can look for, direct them to any other resources that you have, and also a word of encouragement for someone who's just starting to realize, I don't know that I've ever really dealt with emotions in my life, or maybe I have a really faulty picture and I'm not really sure what the next step is. What can they, give some word of encouragement for them?
Well, let's start there.
Okay.
If you're struggling in that way, either you're feeling overwhelmed by your emotions and they're out of control, or you're feeling disconnected from your emotions. And usually if you're disconnected, you feel flat and you have a hard time connecting with other people. Maybe you feel lonely because you don't have relationships that go deep. If you're struggling with that, I think the first thing is to know that you're not alone. That's the trick that our minds play on us. Perhaps the deceiver adds to that, where we feel like if anybody understood what was happening with us, they would exclude us, or they wouldn't understand us, or they think we're a crazy person. And that's not true. What we're talking about here is universal to humanity. We experience it differently, but you're not alone in this struggle. Learning how to learning how to experience, handle, and apply your emotions is the process of growing up. And some of us have been stuck. And growing up means facing this stuff. And it's going to be painful, but pain's not bad. Pain is where we learn and grow. So that's the first thing. You're not alone. And the second thing is that I would suggest you find somebody to have this conversation with. So maybe it's a friend, but it needs to be a friend who's willing to allow you to be in painful places, not a friend who wants to fix you by the end of coffee, right? A friend that lets you be sad, a friend that lets you be angry. Maybe it's a church community, a small group. Again, it needs to be a community that allows you to feel what you feel and allows you to tell the truth about it. Yeah. Maybe you want to read this book and read it with somebody. That's a great step to take. One of the things that I've done, because I really want people to have access to tools to help them grow. And so one of the things I've done on the website, you can find all kinds of things about the book at www.thewisdomofyourheart.com. But one of the things is there's a link on there that says book resources. Okay. And there's a page that's organized by chapter that's just full of additional resources. I think there's probably 35 book recommendations. There's videos that it links to.
Oh, fabulous.
There's studies, like if you want to learn more about the science, it links off to some of the studies. And so you can, if you read a chapter and that chapter really speaks to you, you can go to that page and there's probably 4 or 5 things there to help you go deeper in that particular area. And so there's tons of great stuff. You just want to find the stuff that's rooted in what's true. And what's true is that your emotions are not a sin. They're not a flaw. They're not a weakness. They're a part of how you were made in God's image. God gave them to you to help you grow and have wisdom. And any message that comes saying you need to avoid them or ignore them is going to get in the way of your health and your spiritual maturity. So get in some kind of community where you can talk about these things. Maybe it means you need therapy. I did. Not everybody does, but I needed a person that was completely safe and that had the skill to handle me. They weren't going to fix me. I went in with the idea that they were going to give me solutions and I was going to have exercises that I could do. And really what my therapist did is my therapist kindly, gently held up a mirror and asked me to look at myself truthfully over and over and over and over and over again. Until I was able to let go of some of the pictures I had of myself that were not actually objectively true. and live comfortably with what was. And that's changed things enormously for me.
That's powerful.
Some other resources that go with the book. I created, there's going to be 4 courses that support the book. One of them is available right now, and it's a very simple 6-week course, online course that is set up so that it will work for an individual or a small group. And that is just meant to give people assistance in going through the book. And so it divides the book into 6 weeks. Each week starts with a video, an exclusive video that's nowhere else, where it's about a 10-minute video that sets up the main topic. There's a reading assignment. There's questions for discussion or reflection, and that will walk you through the whole book. That's free. Great. That's available to anybody who wants it. I think it would work really well for facilitating a small group, because you just play the video at the beginning, and then you've got questions to discuss. Anybody, any church, anyone can use that. And then with that, you also get the downloadables that you talked about earlier. So there's a basic emotions chart and some other tools that you can get. Then there's 3 other videos that I'm in the process of finishing up now that'll be coming online in the next quarter, that each go into a different section of the book more in depth. So one of them goes into the section about how our emotions work. And so if that's intriguing to you and you feel like that would be helpful to get more information, one of them is going to go into that and spend, I think, 6 or 7 weeks going into how our emotions work and how that's useful information to us, how we can use that in our lives. One of them goes into the concept of the story that we create. I talked about how that last stage of feeling an emotion is that our brain constructs a narrative. If we don't know that, if we don't understand that, then we live reactively, period, and there's no way around it. It's the reason why women who grew up in abusive homes end up with abusive boyfriends. It's the reason why kids who grew up in super conservative fundamentalist Christian homes go to college and lose their minds. It's because we're living reactively to a story that we carry. And so that course is specifically about helping understand, how does that happen? What is my story? How did it get formed? And how is that impacting the choices that I make? Yeah. The last one actually takes that journaling process, the 5 A's, and is direct coaching. So if reading the chapter on the 5 A's isn't sufficient to really give you a set of tools, then this takes that chapter and spreads it out over 2 months and really walks you through how each part works, how to use it in your daily life, how this might be a tool to help you experience and respond to your emotions. And those are all available. You'll see links there through the book website, thewisdomofyourheart.com.
That's fabulous. I wasn't even aware that there are that many resources. I knew you were working on some stuff, so that's great. I really hope some small groups will connect with that, and I think it's going to probably take somebody who's brave to say, hey, let's go a little deeper. I'm ready. Is anybody else ready in this group to go a little deeper and be vulnerable, and especially with God and ourselves? I think it's just going to be a powerful impact that could influence a lot of people. Okay, well, this has been fabulous. I am so thankful, so thankful for this time, and just the information that you've shared, and the encouragement and the insight. And I do hope that people who are either starting to realize that they're disconnected or overwhelmed with emotions, God brings them to this, and to your book, to your resources, and to just additional content. I think this concept of emotional health and spiritual growth is becoming more aware. I don't know what the right word is, but it's, in the churches, and it makes me excited. So
yeah, me too.
So, all right. Well, thank you for spending your time with us, Marc.
Glad to do it. Thank you very much for having me. It's been great.
All right.